Barron and Kim, a love story, narrated by Grace Winslow, written, produced, and directed by Barron Darby. Prologue, a rented kitchen. Come in and sit down. There is coffee, and there is a chair, and there is a story that is true. Some of you already know the shape of it. You have ridden trails with us in Maryland on a Saturday morning. 30 of us strung out along the pavement like beads on a wire. You have watched 2 quiet people hold hands across a small table on the 3rd night of a cruise. You have stood in a church in Baltimore in July of 2011 and watched a tall woman come up the aisle on her father's arm. If that is you, you will recognize the rooms in this book because you were standing in some of them. And some of you have never met us at all. Somebody put this in your hands and said, "You should hear this one. Stay anyway." The question underneath every page is a question you already carry, whether or not you have ever swiped a badge on the 4th floor of a federal building. Can a man who has spent his whole life leaving learn how to stay? Can a woman who reached 36 without ever once being somebody's girlfriend learn how to be loved without flinching? Can 2 careful people in a loud and hurrying country build a life small enough that they can actually stand inside it? This is my wife's story, and it is mine, and I have tried to tell it the way we have always told it to each other, which is to say honestly, and with the lights low, and without making a fuss over the parts that already ache. What is on the outside of this book is the truth as I remember it. What is on the inside of it is the truth as I felt it, and as I believe she felt it, handed over to you through her eyes as often as through mine. That is the whole promise. I will tell you all of it as plainly as I can, and I want you to know I have not tidied it up, and I will give you the inside as honestly as the outside. Here it is. The coffee maker finishes with a cough and a small hiss of steam. And for a moment, that is the only sound in a kitchen that belongs to somebody else. It is a morning in 2026. The house is a rental in the corridor between Leesburg and Orlando. A beige box with somebody else's cabinet handles, and a refrigerator that hums a note lower than the one they are used to. They have been here long enough to know which floorboard creaks, and short enough that Kim still reaches, some mornings, for a drawer that is not where her drawers used to be. In a few weeks, there will be a different kitchen, a finished one, with keys that a builder has not yet dropped into their hands. For now, there is this one. The coffee in it is theirs. The 2 mugs are theirs. His coffee mug says nothing on it. Hers has a chip she will not throw out. The dishwasher hums. The breakfast table wobbles on a leg they keep meaning to fix. The man and the woman at the table are theirs, and that, this morning, is enough. Barron is at one end in a t-shirt, reading a verse off his phone, with the screen tilted away from the window glare. He is 59 years old. His hairline has quietly conceded most of the argument. There is a cup at his elbow he has not touched. Kim is at the other end, and she is dressed. Not dressed for a commute, because her commute is the 17 feet between where she is sitting and the office just down the hall, but dressed the way she has dressed her whole life for a room where she is going to be looked at. Slacks, a blouse the color of a good plum, earrings. There is a laptop open beside her tea, and 2 large monitors waiting in the office with the door that closes, and a webcam that will, in about half an hour, show a federal writer-editor to a screen full of co-workers in Washington who have decided, over several years now, that hers is the easiest laugh on the call. She has been editing the government's words from her own house in Florida. Since the year the government agreed that a woman who had given it 18 years in one downtown office could give it the same care from a desk that faces a wall 1,000 miles south. She looks up over the rim of the mug. "Pookie," she says. "Kitten," he says. "Did you eat?" "I'll eat. You said that yesterday." He laughs because he did, and because after all this time, it has not once stopped landing as a small gift, being a man whose yesterday somebody keeps track of. There were long years when nobody was keeping track. He has been kept track of now for almost 20. She closes the laptop. She lifts it against her hip, crosses the borrowed linoleum, and kisses the top of his head where the hair used to be. "Office till 4:30, she says. "I'll be here." For 15 years, he has been here at 4:30. That is the love story, more or less. The entire thing folded into one exchange over cold linoleum in a house they do not own. Everything else in this book is only the long account of how 2 people ended up in that kitchen, saying that, meaning it. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Kim, Baltimore. The office building emptied at 5, and by 6, it belonged to Daddy and to her. She was young enough that the vacuum cleaner was almost as tall as she was, and she pushed it in long, even rows down the carpet of a Baltimore insurance office, while Dr. James Tucker worked the far side of the floor with a soft cloth and a bottle of something that smelled like lemons and effort. He whistled while he worked. Not a song exactly, more a low, tuneless music that meant the world was in order. She learned to find him in a dark building by that sound. She learned that, when the whistling stopped, it only meant he had found a smudge worth his full attention. "You missed the corner, baby," he said once, not unkindly, and she backed the vacuum up and did the corner, and he nodded, and the whistling started again. That was the whole lesson. You did the corner. You did it because the corner was part of the room, and the room was the work. And the work was what kept the lights on at home and the food in the refrigerator. And nobody in their house had ever been raised to believe those things arrived by magic. She was born in Baltimore on the 15th of November, 1971, to a woman named Diana and a man named Haywood. Haywood did not stay long past her arrival, and she would not spend her life trying to build a monument on a foundation that had never really been poured. He was the beginning of her biology and very little of her story. The story belonged to the man with the lemon oil cloth. She never once called him stepfather. She called him daddy, and the word came without effort, because love that shows up every single day wears the title down until only the affection is left. Daddy was the voice that moved through the house in the mornings. He had worked years for the federal government and then retired and done the thing that changed the whole rhythm of their home. He started a cleaning business. People hear those two words and picture something small and temporary. They do not understand what a small business was in a black family in Baltimore in those years. It was the thing the whole household stood on. It paid the bills and kept the refrigerator honest and gave them the rare and enormous dignity of owning the ground under their own feet. So she worked it beside him, after school and through the summers, and on the weekends, inside office buildings gone quiet for the night. And she came out of that the kind of person who does not complain about work, because work was never presented to her as a burden. It was simply what a room needed, and you gave it. Even after Towson University handed her a master's degree, she kept coming out on weekends to help Daddy, because loyalty ran on its own clock in their family, and nobody rushed to unstitch what was working. She stayed in her parents' house until she was 36. She knew exactly how that landed on people. She could hear the questions before they were asked, the ones a certain kind of world keeps ready for a certain kind of woman. Why isn't she married? Why didn't she move out? Why doesn't she date? Why won't she go and live her life? And the answer, which nobody wanted, was that she was living it. It just did not look like the version being sold. Hers was peaceful. Peace meant dinner at home. It meant conversations with her mother that ran for hours and cost nothing. It meant church on Sunday, the Ravens on the television loud enough to feel, and a small dog named Coco Chanel asleep on her feet, while Judge Judy corrected the entire country for the 10,000th time. Some Sundays, the whole ambition of the house was a pot roast, a clean kitchen sink, and the toast gone cold while nobody hurried, and she would have laughed out loud at anyone who called that a small life. She was not lonely. People confuse solitude with sorrow because they have never been quiet enough to tell the two apart. She could tell. She was not built for chaos, did not miss the clubs she never went to, felt no hole where a husband was supposed to be. The older she got, the more she understood how rare it is to be genuinely comfortable inside your own company. She has come to think that comfort was one of the reasons Barron would trust her later. Peace can recognize peace across a room. There was one more thing about her that a stranger clocked before anything else. She was 6 feet tall. She had been tall almost her whole life, which meant years of learning to stand inside rooms where people noticed her before they knew a single true thing about her. Add long natural hair and brown skin and a calm that read from a distance, and the entire country arrived at the same conclusion out loud. To this day, they stop her in grocery lines and elevators and airport gates with the identical sentence. Has anyone ever told you that you look like Michelle Obama? Yes, more times than she could count. She always smiles because they mean well, and a thing that starts as a compliment eventually just becomes weather. In 2008, at 36, she made the largest change of her adult life. She took a position with OSHA inside the Department of Labor in Washington. Every weekday, she and her mother rode the MARC train down from Baltimore together. 2 women with their coffee and the morning paper, and 40 minutes that most people her age would have called a punishment, and that she counted quietly as a privilege. Diana would do the crossword and hand it over when she stalled, and Kim would fill in the word her mother had been circling with her pen for 3 stops, and neither of them made anything of it. They talked about church and about Daddy's knees, and about which cousin was not speaking to which cousin, and sometimes they did not talk at all, just rode south into the waking city shoulder to shoulder, while the row houses gave way to the marble. She did not know yet how few of those mornings were left in the world's supply. Nobody ever does. She only knew that she liked her mother, plainly and without complication, the way a grown daughter is lucky to get to, and that the train was the place they got to be 2 friends before the day made them anything else. She was still living at home, still careful, still routine, still entirely herself. The apartment in Perry Hall would come. Florida would come. Cruises, bicycles, Pookie and Kitten, a heron on a pond, a house with keys that had not been cut yet. All of it would come. But on that first ordinary morning, it was only a tall woman from Baltimore, walking into a government building she did not yet have any reason to love, riding the elevator to the 4th floor, not knowing that somewhere in the same building a man in a full suit had 30 days of a probation left, and no idea that the rest of his life was about to say good morning to him. Chapter 2. Barron, Washington. "The badge," said Kimberly, and he read it the way you read a street sign in a city you have just decided to live in. But that is the end of this chapter, so let it wait. He was born in Washington, D.C. on the 11th of August, 1966, to a woman named Claudinia Darby and a man named Alvin Catlett. His mother was married when he came, though not to Alvin. The husband was a man named Arthur Darby. The father was Alvin, who fathered 10 children by 3 different women and gave the youngest of them, the boy, almost nothing but the fact of himself. Life in those years was tangled in ways a child does not question, because by the time the child is old enough to see the shape of his own family, the shape has already become the only normal he has. He grew up feeling like an only child inside a crowd of half-siblings who lived in other houses and other cities, people he knew mostly as fragments of stories, visits that ended before they could deepen into anything you could lean on. He grew up Darby, and he stayed Darby. That is the name on the spine of every book he has written. It is the name Kim would one day take as her own. At a certain point, a name stops being a report about your blood and becomes a statement about your life. And Darby was the life he actually lived. Washington in the late 60s and 70s was 2 cities laid over each other. There was the one on the postcards, the marble and the monuments, and there was the one a black boy actually walked through. Row houses and church clothes on Sunday, corners you learned not to loiter on, and the quiet understanding absorbed early that survival was itself a subject you were expected to pass. The city raised him. The city also taught him loss on an early schedule. His mother died. His father died. His brother Victor died. By the age when most men finally slow down enough to look around, he looked around and understood something that put a cold hand on the back of his neck. He was becoming the last one standing in room after room that had once been full. That kind of arithmetic changes a man on the inside. It changes how he holds a memory, how he values a silence, what he will and will not risk when it comes to loving somebody. He learned to carry it without setting it down in front of company. It never fully left. At 17, 30 days after he crossed a high school stage, he left Washington and joined the United States Navy. He served from 1984 to 1992. This is not the kind of book that reenacts a man's military years to prove he was harder than he was. The Navy's lasting gift was not a story. It was a set of disciplines that outlived the uniform. It taught him to rise before he wanted to keep his shoes mirror bright, to build a bed you could bounce a coin off, to endure an uncomfortable place without complaint. And it taught him one more thing that he did not recognize as a wound until much later. It taught him how to leave a place cleanly before the place could leave him. I will tell you what he cannot say kindly about himself. For most of my life, I could not stay anywhere, and I got so good at leaving that I mistook it for a talent instead of a wound. Nobody was laughing then. After the Navy came the map. Key West, Atlanta, Hampton, Washington again, Laurel, Beltsville, Silver Spring. The list of cities is long because, for a long time, he was looking for something he could not yet name. And a man who cannot name the thing he wants tends to keep changing the scenery, as if the next town will spell it for him. He knows now it was peace. He was hunting peace years before he had the word for it. From 2003 to 2006, he went back into uniform through the Army Reserve, the country deep in another hard season. And like a lot of men, he returned to the one structure that had ever pointed him in a direction. Under all the movement was a loneliness he rarely spoke aloud, and there were losses beneath that which he almost never spoke of at all. He had been married before the woman this book is about, more than once. Those chapters belong to other people, and to versions of himself he has retired, and most of it can be left in its own room with the door shut. But two things cannot honestly be left off the page, because they walked into that downtown federal building. With him, the year, it was 2008, whether he acknowledged them or not. He became a father. His first son, Aaron, did not survive his own birth. No parent is ever told where to file a grief like that, and so it does not get filed. It goes into the blood and travels with you. Later came another son, Marcus, who grew up and put on the uniform of the United States Army, the way his father had once put on the Navy's, and who had a whole future laid out in front of him, right up until the moment he did not. Marcus died at 24. There are losses that split a life permanently into before and after, and that was one. Even now, the man sometimes catches himself building rooms in his head where a grown Marcus should be standing. There were other children, and there still are. His son Barron Jr. carries his name up in Maryland, though life has laid a distance between them that neither of them set out to build. His daughter Ashley is up there too, and his granddaughter Madeline, living their own days at their own pace. Families thicken and tangle as the years stack up. love has a way of outlasting the distance, even when the phone calls do not. And a man learns, somewhere in his 50s, to hold the people he cannot reach with an open hand instead of a closed fist, to keep the door unlocked and the porch light on, and to let that be its own kind of faith. He does not preach about it. He simply keeps the light on. By the time he arrived at the Department of Labor, that first autumn of 2008, he had lived enough to be tired, in a way sleep does not touch. He carried grief and failed marriages and military years and disappointment, and the low daily hum of a man who wanted peace badly and had no working theory of how a person makes one. Then, one ordinary morning, he walked into the 4th floor snack room, and a woman was standing near the vending machines. 6 feet tall, long natural hair, brown skin that the ugly fluorescent light overhead could not do a thing to dull. Calm, unhurried, beautiful without appearing to have consulted anyone about it. He let his eyes drop to the badge clipped at her collar, and there it was. Kimberly. He smiled before he had consciously decided to speak, which is a thing his mother's son had always done. Chapter 3. Kim, 36, and still home. He said it like they had known each other for years. Good morning, Kim. She was standing at the vending machine with 2 quarters warming in her palm, and she looked up into a face she had never seen before in her life. Back up half a step to the room, because the room is the thing. The 4th floor snack room in the labor building was exactly as glamorous as its name. A vending machine that ate your money one morning in 5. A refrigerator crowded with labeled lunches nobody would dare steal. A microwave with a turntable that squealed. A coffee maker on a burnt ring. 1 small round table and 4 chairs, and at any given moment 3 or 4 federal employees taking a breather from something upstairs. She was one of the 3 or 4. She took her breather at the same time most mornings, because she was a creature of pattern, and the pattern was hers. She had noticed him before he noticed her, though she would not have admitted it. The first thing she clocked was the suit. It sounds like a shallow thing to lead with, exactly the kind of thing the magazines insist a black woman notices first. And she led with it anyway, because he was the only man in the entire building wearing a full suit. Vest, tie, cufflinks, shoes that had been given real attention that same morning. Everyone else in that building had long ago melted into the business casual sludge of a federal office in the 2000s. He had not gotten the memo. She would learn over the next several months that he had gotten the memo and quietly declined to read it. The second thing she noticed was that when she looked at him, she did not have to look down. She was 6 feet tall. In the whole of her adult life, she had met very few men who met her at the eyes, and she was not saying she had been searching for one, only that her gaze had spent 36 years traveling a small downward distance to land on a man's face, and this man's did not require the trip. They stood level, across a snack room with a squealing microwave and a burnt coffee ring. She was, for the first time in her life, eye to eye with a grown man who was not her father, and he was reading her badge. Here is the honest interior of the half-second between his sentence and hers. She thought, "This man does not know me." She thought, "I am about to be polite to a stranger, the way I am polite to every stranger, because Dr. James Tucker raised a daughter who speaks to people, whether or not she has been introduced." There was no violin in the room. There was a vending machine and a fluorescent tube with a flicker in it. "Good morning," she said. That was the entire first conversation. She carried her coffee back upstairs and did not, that day, understand that anything had happened, because on the surface nothing had. But it is worth being plain about who she was that autumn, because it explains everything that came after. At 36, she had never had a boyfriend. She had never, in the romantic sense, been touched. She had grown up in a house of faith and stayed in it, and somewhere in the framework she had absorbed there, the touching belonged to the marriage, and the marriage had simply never shown up. She had not been standing at a window waiting for it. She had been busy being content. She can laugh about it now, at her own kitchen table. "I did not know what I was doing when it came to men," she will say, laughing. "I was too busy being fine to notice." The marriage had not arrived because she had never once organized a single Tuesday around trying to summon it. You will hear that and think one of two things. You will think, "What a peaceful woman," or you will think, "What a waste." She has earned the first reading because she is the one who lived on the inside of those years, and from the inside they were not empty. They were full of her mother's voice and her father's whistle, and a small dog, and a train, and a job she was still learning. Later that same year, she made a small decision that turned out to be a large one. She moved out. A 1-bedroom in Perry Hall, nothing to photograph, a little living room and a little kitchen, and the kind of carpet you never quite make peace with. But it was hers. It was the first thing in the entire ledger of her life, with only her name on the lease. On Saturday afternoons, she would lie on the couch with Coco Chanel asleep across her ankles and study the ceiling and think calmly that she was 36 and living alone, and that the world had not ended that in fact she was going to be fine. And every weekday, she rode the marked train with her mother, down in the morning and back in the evening. 4 hours a day that most women her age would have bought back at any price, and that she spent as if she knew already that there would come a year when she would give anything for one more of them. She did not know that yet. What she knew was the snack room and a man in cufflinks who, starting the very next morning, began appearing there at exactly the time she did. Chapter 4. Barron 42. He walked back to his cubicle after good morning and discovered that the room had a new object in it, and he could not for the life of him decide what to do about it. He was 42. He had been across those 42 years a son and a brother and a sailor, and a husband again, and a father bereft and a contractor, and now a federal employee 8 or 9 months into a probation that had not yet decided whether to keep him. On the morning he read her badge, he was also, quietly, a separated man. The second marriage was in its long last stretch, the kind of distance between two people that does not, as a rule, close back up. That woman is not in this book, and the marriage is not the one the book is about. The book is about the third one, the one that took, the one that reached back and made the first two make a rough kind of sense by being the thing neither of them had been. He had spent years as a careful student of his own pattern, and the pattern was that he did not stay. The Navy had taught him to leave well, and after the Navy, he had kept leaving town after town until leaving had become a kind of signature. He had been honest with himself about it for a while now. What he had not been given in all those years was a single good reason to break the habit. He lived that autumn in a small apartment in Silver Spring, the sort of place a separated man in his 40s ends up in, with a couch he had chosen alone, and a dresser he had assembled slightly wrong, and a refrigerator that on most weeks held 2 things and an opinion. His whole grocery philosophy those years was coffee, hot sauce, and whatever the corner store still had, and the friends who opened that refrigerator laughed at him openly. He dressed for work the way he always had: suit, vest, tie, cufflinks, shoes brought to a shine. People have asked him since why a man drawing a modest federal salary back then, in 2008, was still turning up in cufflinks. And the answer is a woman named Claudinia, who taught her son in a row house in Washington that a black man dresses for the room he intends to walk into, not the one he is walking into. The room he walked into most days was a gray cubicle. The room he was dressing for had not yet appeared. He put on the cufflinks for it anyway. The way you set an extra place for a guest you are still hoping will come. noticed her at the vending machine, and he noticed, in order, that she was tall, that her hair was long and natural in a way you did not often see on a black woman over 30 inside a federal building that year, that her skin held a particular brown the overhead lighting could not flatten, and that she carried herself the way a woman carries herself when she has been told all her life that she resembles a famous and dignified person, and has decided to let that be the world's problem rather than hers. She stood in the light like someone who knew how to be looked at without surrendering an inch of herself. He read the badge, Kimberly. He is the kind of man who, seeing a name he has just read off a badge, will use it as if it were an old acquaintance. And he does not fully know why he is that kind of man. He thinks he simply always believed the room is smaller than it looks, that the person across the linoleum is, in some sense, already someone you know, if you can only find the short bridge over the tile. So he built the short bridge. "Good morning, Kim." She looked up the way you look at a person who has addressed you in a language you did not know they spoke. And then, because she was who she was, because a man in Baltimore had raised her to answer whether or not she had been introduced, she answered him, "Good morning." That was the whole of it. He walked back to the cubicle, and for the first time in a very long time, the interior of his 42-year-old life had a piece of furniture in it that had not been there the day before. He did not know its use. He only knew it was in the room and would not be moved. The snack room, the woman at the machine, the badge that said Kimberly. So he did the only thing a careful man does with a thing he cannot stop thinking about. He changed his schedule. He began taking his morning coffee break at exactly the time she took hers, and he told himself it was about the coffee, and he did not believe himself for a second. Part 2. The Snack Room. Chapter 5. Kim the Lunches. By 10:15, the anticipation had a name, and the name was embarrassing, and she would not have said it out loud to save her life. That was the hour. Somewhere around 10:15 every weekday morning, something in her that she did not entirely approve of began to expect the sound of a certain pair of polished shoes in the 4th floor hallway. She was not a woman who built her feelings around waiting. Her weeks were laid down long before Baron Darby appeared inside them. Church on Sunday, the Ravens claiming whole afternoons in season, Judge Judy running almost by itself in the apartment after work, Fridays for cleaning her own place, and Saturdays for helping Daddy clean everyone else's. Her life moved on rails she had bolted down herself. And now there was a man in an expensive tie walking straight through the timetable she had started, God help her, setting her coffee break to his. She had made exactly one decision about him at first, and it was a small one. She decided to keep speaking. That was all. Dr. James Tucker and Diana Tucker had not raised a daughter who let mood decide her manners. You acknowledged people. You greeted them. So each morning, when the man with the cufflinks appeared, she gave him the greeting, and he gave it back. And for 2 weeks it stayed exactly that polite and that safe. The careful currency, a single black woman of 36 trades, with a man she has not yet decided whether to trust. But by the 3rd week, she had noticed something. Everybody in Washington said words at her all day. The conductor said tickets, please. The cashier downstairs said $2.50. A coworker said, did you get that email? Barron said good morning, as though he had actually meant to wish her one. In a city where most people spend the day emotionally jogging past each other, that landed harder than it had any right to. By the 2nd month, they were going to lunch, though nobody called it that, because grown people in federal buildings will insist on the fiction of coincidence for as long as they possibly can. The first lunch was 2 people who merely happened to walk downstairs at the same moment. The second was apparently another accident of scheduling. By the 4th, even she had stopped pretending, and they sat in the cafeteria over food the government should have been ashamed of, and had conversations that fed her better than anything on the tray. And Lord, they talked. She told him about Towson and about Daddy and the cleaning business and what it had carried. She told him about her mother and the Mark train, and Coco Chanel curled against her while a woman on television scolded strangers. And one afternoon, because a kind of trust had been quietly accumulating like interest, she told him something she had never handed a man casually before. She told him she had never had a boyfriend, 36 years old, and never anybody's girl, never lived with a man, never built 1 square inch of herself around being wanted. She watched his face while she said it, the way you watch for weather, because people do strange things with a woman who does not fit the timeline, and they do stranger things when she is black. She braced for confusion. What she got was curiosity with respect folded into it, and that mattered more than charm ever could have. He told her his own stories, the cleaned up ones. The Navy, the Army Reserve, cycling, a rope of cities, a marriage that had failed, but she could feel the doors he was not opening. There was a weight to him some afternoons, not bitterness exactly, more like exhaustion carried very carefully beneath the tailoring. And she knew, long before he said a word about it, that there was still a marriage somewhere behind him. Women know. The conversations had a fence around them of the kind a married man builds without noticing when he is trying hard to stay honest. She did not ask, partly out of respect, partly because she was not ready for an answer that might make her step back from whatever this was becoming. And at that stage, she did not need romance from him. She needed the lunches. Then one afternoon in the hallway, he asked if she would look over something he was writing. She had told him she liked to write and edit, so the request itself did not surprise her. What surprised her was what he put in her hands. It was a will, not a poem, not a note, not some smooth downtown pass. A last will and testament for his mother. She stood in the corridor with the pages and felt something turn over in her chest. And years later, she still laughs about it and has laughed retelling it at a dozen kitchen tables since, because it may be the strangest overture in the recorded history of courtship. Other men buy dinner. Baron Darby handed a woman end-of-life paperwork and asked her to make the language right. She took it home that night. She sat at her own small kitchen table in Perry Hall with a red pen and a cup of tea, Coco Chanel a warm weight against her ankle, and read a mother's entire life narrowed down into clauses. Who was to receive what? Who was to be told, and in what order? The plain, unbearable grammar of a person planning to be gone. She fixed a tense that wandered and cut a sentence that ran too long, and softened a line that had come out colder on the page than she suspected he had felt it in his chest. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet work, she understood exactly what he had handed her. A man does not give his mother's death to a woman he is merely killing time with. He does not let her see the arithmetic of his grief. The careful sums a son does when he is trying to leave nothing unspoken for the woman who raised him. He had let her all the way in, and he had done it by pretending it was a favor about punctuation. At lunch the next day he asked, not quite meeting her eyes, whether she had gotten a chance to look at it. She told him yes. She told him what she had changed and why, and he nodded along until she reached the line she had softened, and there he went still, the way he goes still, and did not say anything for a moment, and then said only, "Thank you, that's better." She let it be better. She did not make him say the rest of it. She had already learned that with him, the important things arrived sideways, disguised as small ones. And somehow it worked, because underneath, the sheer awkwardness of it was trust, the real kind. He was letting her stand next to something tender, something tangled up in family and fear and duty and love. And she would take that over a bouquet any day of the week. Then the floor went out from under him. was let go from his job at labor during his probation. And she remembers the phone call, remembers the weight in his voice before he had finished the first sentence, remembers hearing under the plain facts of it a fear that had nothing to do with pride. Fear about rent. Fear about what came next. And she heard herself answer with a word she had not planned. We'll figure it out. The we arrived on its own, as if it had been waiting under every one of those lunches for its cue. A few days later, she drove to his apartment in Silver Spring. She looked at the small rooms, at the paperwork on the counter, at the composure he was working so hard to keep across a face that was not fooling her. And she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, this is a good man, a tired one, a complicated one carrying things he does not fully say, but good. So she looked at him and said the sentence that rerouted both their lives. Come stay with me. No score swelled. Nobody made a speech. Just a woman of 36 standing in a rented living room, discovering that she had no intention whatsoever of letting this man go through the hard part by himself. And for the first time in longer than he could measure, Barron stopped facing the next thing alone. Chapter 6. Barron, come stay with me. The letter was on the counter, and he had been standing over it long enough that the coffee had gone cold, which is how a bad afternoon announces itself in a grown man's kitchen. The quiet in the Silver Spring apartment was the specific quiet a man's worst afternoons have, the kind that arrives when there is nowhere else for the news to land, so it lands in him at his own counter, in his own silence. He was reading the page that explained what had happened, and he was doing the thing a man in his position does, which is standing very still and asking the ceiling what the next thing is going to be. The next thing was a phone call from the woman he had been having lunch with for the better part of a year. There was a great deal she did not know about him that afternoon, and she made her decision without any of it. She had not been given Aaron. She had not been given Marcus. She had not been given the second marriage in its long last stretch, or the full catalogue of cities. In 10 months of cafeteria trays, he had handed her the tidy version, the Navy, and the brother named Victor, and the long avenues of a 70s Washington, and had not yet gotten around to the parts that hold the weight of a life. He told her on the phone what had happened, straight, the way he tells most things, without dressing the news in anything. The probation had not gone the way he needed it to go. The rent in 2 weeks was now a question he did not have a clean answer for. She listened. She said she was sorry, and then she said, "We'll figure it out." He was careful with that we. He did not mistake it for an offer it had not been. He simply set it on a high shelf in the back of his mind, the shelf where he kept the few good sentences his life had handed him in those years. And he waited to see whether she would mean it in daylight. The next afternoon, she came to Silver Spring. She knocked, and he let her in, and she looked around at the small rooms and the counter with its bad news, and the boxes he had somehow never fully unpacked in any apartment he had ever rented, cardboard cities stacked in a corner. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at him. "Barron," she said. "Yeah, come stay with me." He sat down on the couch he had chosen alone. He did not say yes right away, and he did not say no. He sat, and he looked at her standing in the narrow space between the counter and the door, and he ran the private ledger. A man like him runs before he agrees to a thing that will change what kind of man he has been for the rest of his life. He had been, for decades, a man whose pattern was leaving, a man who did the leaving first so that the leaving could not be done to him. He had made a signature of it. He had never, in 42 years, been handed a reason big enough to stop. She was the reason. He said yes. He packed a bag. Not everything, not on the first afternoon. Only the bag a man packs when part of him still does not believe the thing he is about to do. A couple of shirts, a couple of pairs of pants, the toothbrush and the razor, and the small leather-bound Bible his mother had given him in the 80s, the one that had written out every Navy posting and every apartment after, the thing he would have grabbed if any of those places had ever caught fire. She drove him to Perry Hall, up Interstate 95 and around on the Beltway, and into a suburb on the northeast side of Baltimore that he could not have found on a map the week before. She let him into her apartment. It was small and it was clean, the kind of home a woman keeps when she has spent 36 years learning from a mother and a father exactly how a kitchen is supposed to be run. There was a little living room and a little kitchen and a little bedroom, and there was Coco Chanel on the couch. There was a smell he had no name for that first afternoon, and would later be able to identify precisely as the smell of a well-kept home with a particular fabric softener in it. The softener Kim has bought, without fail, for as long as he has known her. He could not have named a fabric softener at gunpoint before her, and he laughed at himself for how fast the smell of the laundry became the smell of home. She showed him the bathroom and the closet and the corner of the kitchen where a few of his things could go. She put on a pot of coffee. She sat down. Coco Chanel crossed the room, sniffed thoroughly at his shoes, conducted whatever silent deliberation a small dog past the age of 10 conducts before admitting a new piece of furniture to the household, and decided he would do. He sat down beside her. "Thank you," he said. "You can stay as long as you need to." He had told himself that first hour that he would stay a month. Men give a change a cap in its first hour, a small fence they know in their hearts it will step over. He stayed a month. He stayed 2. He stayed 6. And 6 months into staying, they packed up the little apartment and pointed a truck south, because the woman who had opened a door had decided the next thing was a house with both their names on it. Chapter 7. Kim Spearfish Place. The bed frame had not survived the move in any assemblable order, so they slept the first night on a mattress on the floor of a house that was, at last, theirs. She lay there in the dark of Spearfish Place, listening to a new house make its unfamiliar sounds. Coco Chanel, a warm weight at their feet, Barron already breathing slow beside her. And she thought that she was 38 years old and lying on a bare mattress in Waldorf, Maryland, and that she had never in her life felt more certain of a floor. The wanting had started the previous spring. The Perry Hall apartment had been hers, and by the 7th month of Barron's staying, it had quietly become the place they both lived, and only one of them had signed for, and she had begun, the way these things begin, to want a different arrangement. She wanted both names on the lease. She wanted both names on a mailbox. She wanted, to say it plainly, a house. She is not a woman who dramatizes a want. She puts it on the short list in her head and starts walking toward it. By early summer of 2009, she was touring townhouses across southern Maryland. By late summer, they had found the one they both liked on a street called Spearfish Place, and they bought it and loaded a small U-Haul and drove south with Coco Chanel in her lap and Barron at the wheel, and the truck making its truck noises. The pair of them saying almost nothing the whole way, because the saying that needed doing would not have fit in the cab. Here is what the house meant, and she never said it to him at the time. It meant she had chosen, somewhere below language, the man she intended to own a floor with for the rest of her life. Neither of them announced it. They were not the announcing kind. They simply kept living in its direction. And they were good at the ordinary days. She worked at OSHA. He found a federal contract job. They rode the commuter bus and endured the long beltway crawl the way half of southern Maryland did in those years. They went to church. They drove up to Baltimore for Sunday dinner at her parents' table, where Daddy still whistled in the kitchen and her mother still ran the room. On Saturday mornings, they did the grocery store together off the list she wrote the night before, and Barron carried the bags in from the garage every time without being asked. He shelved the groceries wrong that first year, so she would find the soup with the cereal after a run to the supermarket. And she just laughed and left it where he put it, because the man who carries the bags loses the argument about the cereal shelf. She noticed that. She had spent her whole life as the one who carried the bags. She was not on Spearfish Place, that woman anymore, and she noticed it every single week. 2 large things happened in that townhouse that have to go on the page. The first was that Barron lost the contract job. It was the second time she had watched employment fall out from under him. She will not dwell on the mechanics of it, because the mechanics were ordinary. A federal contract that simply ended and took his paycheck with it, landing in the small kitchen on an afternoon that does not need a date. But the timing does need one, because it landed 2 months before the second large thing. The second large thing was that they decided to get married. It did not look like a decision from the outside. There was no restaurant, no ring in a box at the close of a meal, no bended knee. There was a conversation in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in the early spring of 2011. 2 grown people who had been sharing a townhouse for almost 2 years, agreeing in the plain way they agreed on most things, that the next step was the legal one. They picked a date, the 9th of July, 2011. They picked Baltimore, because Baltimore was where her mother and daddy were, and Baltimore was where she had grown up. And on any list of cities she might ever have drawn up for a wedding of her own, Baltimore had always been the only name on it. Then, 2 months out, the contract job vanished, and the money that was supposed to cover the parts of the wedding, the savings, would not cover vanished with it. In a careful Black household run by a careful woman in her late 30s, that is precisely the kind of loss that postpones a wedding. They did not postpone the wedding. They did not postpone it because they had already lived once inside the fact that when the floor gives way, the 2 of them find the next board together. She had found it by opening a door. He had found it by walking through it. And now they were about to find it again. Chapter 8. Barron God showed up. He came home on a Friday, sat down at the kitchen counter, and told the woman he was going to marry in 8 weeks that the money for the wedding was gone. He was 44. The contract had not been large, and losing it would not have made the local news, and none of that made it smaller in the small townhouse on Spearfish Place, where the news pulled out a chair and sat down at the table with both of them and asked plainly what they intended to do about it. He told her the way he had told her 2.5 years before, that the agency downtown had let him go straight, without extra clothing on it. The contract had ended, would be gone. And the wedding, on the quiet spreadsheet they had been keeping, had just become a math problem they did not have the numbers for. He had come up a believer. A small black church in Washington, his mother on the front pew, the choir at their backs. A preacher in the late 70s teaching the boys in the third row that a man's job on the long timeline was to keep showing up. He had carried the showing up into the Navy and out of the Navy and through the cities and into this kitchen. He had also learned, somewhere along that road, to let God keep his own calendar and to stop confusing his preferred timeline with the one that was actually running. The spring of 2011 was going to be a lesson in the difference. She listened, and she did not say much in the first hour, because Kim is not a woman who spends words in the first hour of bad news. In the first hour, she makes a cup of tea and lets the news settle into her before she answers it. He has learned over the years to give her that hour. It is hers. She made the tea. She sat with it. And when the hour was up, she set the cup down and said, "We will figure it out." So here is what they did with the next 8 weeks. They prayed. In plain words, they prayed. They prayed in the little living room and at the kitchen counter, and in the car on the way up to Baltimore on a Sunday in May. They prayed the prayers two grown believers in a money pinch actually pray, which are not the prayers of people who think heaven is a vending machine that takes a quarter and drops a candy bar, but the prayers of people reminding themselves that they are not, in any room they are sitting in, the only one in it. And they did not move the date. 8 weeks went by, and then, told the way he has told it in the back pew of every Sunday school class since, the way the people who raised him in those small churches always tell this kind of thing. God showed up. That sentence belongs on the page because it is the sentence the two of them have used on every occasion of this kind from that spring forward. The dead contract did not come back to life. A different one arrived. The income that had gone came back in a new shape, through a door they had not known was a door. And the math problem, the wedding, had become quietly resolved into a math problem they knew the numbers for. He remembers the evening it turned. He had been at the kitchen counter with the spreadsheet open and his jaw set, running the same bad numbers a fourth time, as if the fourth time might be kinder than the third. And the phone rang, and it was work that was work again. An offer where a week before there had been a closed door. He listened, and he said the careful yes a man says when he does not want to jinx a thing. And he set the phone down and stood there for a second with his hand still on it. Kim was across the kitchen. She had been watching him take the call without pretending she was not watching. He did not make a speech. He just looked at her and said, "Lo, 2 words. God showed up." And she came across the kitchen and put her arms around him. And neither of them said the rest, because the rest did not need saying. And the wedding was back on the calendar where it had never actually left. They paid for the wedding. They had the wedding. The wedding is hers, and she tells it next. But here, in the last of this chapter, is what those 8 weeks taught him about the woman he was about to marry. She did not waver. Not once in 56 days did she look at him across that little living room and ask if he was sure. She did not ask whether they should put it off. She did none of the careful, reasonable retreating that any woman would have been entitled to. She had decided. The 9th of July was the 9th of July, and the money would be found. And the finding was the kind of work we did together. He has stood in the years since in a number of rooms with men about to marry women, and he gives most of them the same short piece of counsel. Watch her in the worst 8 weeks of the year before the wedding, and ask yourself one honest question. Did she waver? If she did not, you are marrying the right one. If she did, you have some thinking left to do. I will tell you the half he leaves out. I could not see the money coming, and I spent a couple of nights sure I had led her into a mistake, then laughed at myself for doubting a woman who does not. Kim did not waver. He married the right woman. Chapter 9. Kim, Baltimore, July 9th. She woke before the sun had finished coming up in Felicia's house in Baltimore, to the smell of coffee moving down the hall. For years afterward, it would be the day people asked her about more than any other, and she came to understand that memory does not keep a wedding the way people assume it does. They imagine it stored like a photograph in a frame, sharp and complete, ready to be replayed exactly. Hers has never worked that way, and she suspects most people's do not. What fades first are the very details everyone expects you to keep. She could not tell you every flower on every table, or the order the songs came in once the reception started, or what shade her own lipstick was by the end of the night. Even the words her mother whispered to her before the ceremony have gone soft at the edges. Those things belong to the photographs now, frozen somewhere outside of her. What stayed was the feeling of the morning, the particular hush a house holds before something important, when nobody is fully asleep and nobody is moving loudly either, and the anticipation seems to live inside the walls. She remembers, before she even opened her eyes, the coffee brewing somewhere down the hall. She remembers walking into the kitchen and finding Felicia already there in a small print dress, moving softly around the counters so as not to wake the house. The warm yellow ceiling light pooling on the countertops, while the pot hissed and steamed beside her. What struck her most, even then, was how ordinary it all felt. That is the part nobody warns you about. Sometimes the largest day of your life does not arrive with an orchestra and a sense that the earth has shifted under your feet. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed in the same kitchen light your life has always worn. She thought about the girls, the women she had ridden the train, and lived a whole earlier life beside, Rackwell and Felicia and Tinook, the ones who had heard her complain about work and laughed with her, until they all cried and wonder aloud in the years before Barron, whether marriage was ever going to be a thing that happened to her at all. By 39, a woman makes a certain peace with certain possibilities, not out of bitterness, and not even out of sadness, just realism. She had never collected bridal magazines or hidden a notebook of color palettes in the back of a closet. Her adulthood had been practical, the way a lot of working Black women's adulthoods are practical, built around responsibility and routine and bills and family, and the steady labor of putting a decent life together one ordinary day at a time. And then at 39, she was putting on a wedding dress. The picture that stayed sharpest, the one that never softened, is Daddy in the doorway of the venue. He wore his good suit, the one he had pressed himself the night before. It was not expensive, and it was not flashy. It was the suit a Black man from Baltimore keeps for the handful of days that ask for it. Funerals and graduations and church anniversaries, and this once, a wedding. His shoes had been polished at the kitchen table the evening before, and she knew, without being told, that her mother had reached up and straightened his tie at least twice before they left the house. He stood there quietly, carrying himself with the same calm dignity she had known her whole life. Dr. James Tucker was never a man who spoke when speaking was not required. He did not rush at her with a speech or a flood of feeling when he saw her standing there in the dress. He looked at her and he nodded, the same small nod he had given her since she was a girl backing a vacuum cleaner up to redo a corner. She understood it instantly, because a daughter learns her father's language long before she understands the world. The nod meant she was all right. It meant he was there. It meant the day was going to be fine. Standing in her wedding dress, she nodded back at him, the way she always had. Some conversations between a father and a daughter never need a single word. And then Daddy put her hand on his arm and walked her toward the other quiet man in her life. She does not remember the music that carried her up the aisle, but she remembers the length of the walk, how a distance she could have crossed in a few unhurried steps on any other day seemed to take a small forever. And she remembers that at the end of it, Barron was standing there in a suit that finally had company. A whole church full of men who had, for once, dressed to his standard. He was not smiling the easy snack room smile. He was doing something she had never seen him do, which was letting his face show the whole of it, the tired years and the lost ones, and the plain astonishment of a man who had spent his life arriving on purpose at a place he intended to stay. Daddy set her hand in his and stepped back, and the handoff was so quiet that most of the room probably missed it. One careful man passing her to another. They said the words people say. She meant every one of hers, and she could hear that he meant every one of his. And when it was done, they walked back down the aisle married, past Rackwell and Felicia and Tinook, past her mother, past the good pressed suit in the second row, out into the rest of it. Part 3. The Long Years. Chapter 10. Barron Bicycles. He held the back of the saddle while she wobbled forward across the bike shop parking lot, and he did not let go until she told him to. It was a Saturday morning in southern Maryland, sometime after the wedding, and he had walked her into a small shop and helped her pick out her first bicycle, a hybrid, forgiving and upright and unintimidating. The right machine for a grown woman easing back towards something her body had not done in decades. Now she was out on the asphalt trying to remember a set of movements from another lifetime, and he was jogging alongside with one hand on the seat, and he could feel every emotional wobble travel up through the frame into his palm. That is the thing nobody tells you about adults on bicycles. A child falls off without shame. A grown woman feels every teeter in her dignity. But Kim stayed with it. There were spills. She came up from one of them, laughing so hard she could not climb back on for a minute. And that was when he knew she would be fine. By the end of the afternoon, she was riding clean loops around the lot on her own. By the next weekend, she could handle a trail with real confidence. Within a month, she was holding his pace on rides all over southern Maryland, as though she had been doing it for years. Somewhere out on that pavement, without a ceremony, the hour formed. They were no longer his bicycles. They became theirs. But bicycles do not float free in a marriage. They live inside jobs and houses, and the practical scaffolding two adults raise together. And two of those things have to come first. In 2012, they built a house. By then, they had been married a year and together nearly 4. And Spearfish Place had done its job, as the place two working people start out while they figure out what their life is going to look like. It had held the engagement and the wedding planning and the first married year. But by the spring of 2012, they both knew the townhouse was not where the long middle of the marriage was going to happen. And there was a piece of practical knowledge that changed everything. The kind of thing veterans often learn years too late. He had served Navy from 1984 to 1992 and Army Reserve from 2003 to 2006. And he had spent all that time eligible for a VA home loan he did not fully understand. When they bought the townhouse in 2009, they had bought it conventionally, because that was simply how they thought houses got bought. By 2012, they knew better. They found a lot in Waldorf on a street called Sugarberry, barely 2 miles from the townhouse. And for once in their marriage, they watched something rise out of the ground that would belong entirely to them. Most evenings, after the bus carried them back from Washington, they drove over to the site just to see what the day had added. They stood in a dusty lot in their work clothes and looked at exposed framing and open sky where a roof would be, and treated it all like evidence of a future slowly becoming real. One week it was windows. The next it was siding, then cabinets, then floors, then light fixtures. He thinks now that those evenings were the first true construction project of the marriage, not the house itself so much as the habit of showing up together to watch a thing get built. They moved into 10,386 Sugarberry Street in the late summer of 2012. Over 4,000 square feet, larger than anything either of them had ever lived in, with a real garage that would eventually fill up with bicycles and tools and the honest clutter of middle age. Sugarberry was home for the next 10 years, and right around then, he found the job that anchored those years, a federal contract position at the Government Accountability Office in Washington, the GAO, where he stayed 7 years and 4 months. They were steady years, not the kind that get made into movies, and most marriages are not built in dramatic years anyway. They are built in the steady ones. Kim worked at OSHA only a few blocks from his building, and for years, their days ran almost choreographed. The same commuter bus in the morning, the walk together through the federal corridor, the same corner where they split off toward their separate doors, and the same corner where they met again at the close of the day to ride home to Waldorf. There is a strange intimacy in building a life beside someone whose whole workday sits 3 blocks from your own. Even apart, you are never entirely separated. And somewhere inside those years, the bicycles became part of them. He had ridden most of his adult life. Back in the late 90s, he had ridden with a group called Black Ski, which, despite the name, was less about snow than about giving black adults in the Washington and Baltimore corridor a place to be outdoors together. They rode the C and O Canal, and the W and OD Trail, and the long web of paved paths cut through the region for people trying to reclaim a little peace from a working life. By the time he married Kim, cycling had been part of his identity for over a decade. For Kim, it had belonged to another life entirely, which is why the machines in this story matter. They had to be turned from his into theirs, patiently and a little awkwardly, the way everything in a marriage gets built. In 2012, they joined a cycling club called Getting It In, GII to everyone in it, one of those deeply rooted Black cycling communities that existed quietly all along the corridor, built less around competition than around company. Saturday mornings turned sacred. 30 miles or so, 15 to 40 riders looping out through Maryland trails and suburban roads, and back to the same lot they had left. Midway, they would stop at a bakery or a coffee shop, peel off helmets, sit around sweating through their gear, and laugh loud enough to turn heads. He can still see one of those rest stops clearly. A bakery on a 2-lane road with the bikes leaned in a tangle against the front windows, and 15 grown professionals crowded around tables meant for half that many helmet hair and clip-clop cycling shoes on the tile. Somebody's doctor and somebody's contractor, and a retired school teacher, all arguing cheerfully about the hill still to come. Kim would have a coffee and half of whatever he ordered, and she would be in the middle of it, drawing out the shy new rider at the far end of the table, learning where the woman worked and whether her knees were holding up, filing it all away the way she files everything. He would sit back and watch his wife do the thing she did not know she was gifted at, which was making a stranger feel, in about 4 minutes, like she had been coming to these rides for years. He had married a quiet woman. Out here on a Saturday, she was quiet the way a good host is quiet, moving the warmth around the room without ever raising her voice. And he loved her at those tables in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with respect. Every weekend for nearly 8 years they rode. Say that slowly. Every Saturday for 8 years. Most marriages never find a shared discipline that steady. Theirs did. And the thing that surprised him most was how completely Kim took to it. This woman who at her core preferred a quiet weekend and a familiar couch. Because the riders who fell behind needed someone patient at the back with them, and it turned out she was made for exactly that. That part of the story is hers to tell. Chapter 11, Kim Trailblazers. One Saturday early on, she got home from a ride that had run longer than anyone promised, walked in the door, she genuinely did not know if she was built for this at all. She remembers that afternoon precisely, the way you remember the low point of a thing you later became good at. She had been the slow rider at the back, watching the group shrink to dots ahead of her on the trail. She remembers flat tires and the quiet panic that settles into a beginner when everyone else looks so easy in their bodies. She remembers standing on the edge of the pavement, legs gone to rubber, wondering whether she had made a fool of herself by trying. And then she remembers the other thing, the thing that stayed with her even longer than the exhaustion. She remembers that people came back for her. An experienced rider would circle back to ride at her shoulder when she fell off the pace. Somebody always stopped when a tire went flat. Nobody made her feel small for being new. That culture taught her something about community years before she understood she would one day help build one. She can only laugh at that first ride now. I made an idiot of myself out there, she says, laughing. I could not get up a hill without giving myself a speech. By 2014, the woman crying in her doorway was gone. 2 years and hundreds of trail miles later, she and Barron had become the riders who drifted, on purpose, toward the back of the pack to stay with the newcomers. Cyclists call them sweep riders, the ones who hang behind everybody else, so that no one is ever left alone out there. The role fit them like a good glove. The back of the ride was where the nervous people were, and the tired ones, and the ones quietly asking themselves whether they belonged. Kind people tend to end up wherever kindness is most needed. And on a long Saturday, it was almost always needed at the back. Week after week, the same thing kept happening. New riders arrived thrilled and terrified, and by the midpoint, fell off the main group, and she and Barron stayed with them, setting a gentler pace while trying to keep their confidence from leaking away. After months of it, they sat down with the GII leadership and said out loud what they had already figured out on the trail. This needed to be its own group. The leadership agreed on the spot. Then somebody asked the obvious question. What do you want to call it? Trailblazers, she said. The name arrived instantly, because the trails were the whole reason most of these riders had come. They had no interest in sharing a Maryland road with impatient drivers. The trails were where a beginner could wobble without feeling exposed. Protected ribbons of pavement cut quietly through the corridor long before any of them knew how badly they would need one. So Trailblazers became exactly what its name promised. A group for people who wanted to build their nerve on the trails first and worry about everything else later. She and Barron led it from 2014 through 2018. At any given time, there were 10 to 30 riders moving through it. Some were coming back from surgery. Some were trying to lose weight. Some were middle-aged Black adults going looking for a healthier version of themselves after years of putting work and family ahead of their own bodies. Some were brand new to the area and hunting for community as much as exercise. And that is what the group quietly turned into. Not a cycling club, a community. She learned more about people on those rides than she ever expected to. You find out a great deal about someone at the hard middle of a long route, when the legs are shot and the doubt starts talking louder than the confidence. She became the one who could sit beside a struggling rider at the edge of a trail and convince her she was going to finish. She became the one who heard fear hiding inside a joke. She learned everyone's name, everyone's bad knee, everyone's private reason for showing up. There is something deeply moving about watching grown adults rediscover their own bodies after years of believing certain doors had shut for good. And week after week, they came back. They came back after falling. They came back after flats. They came back up hills they had been sure would break them. Because somewhere out there, they had discovered that nobody was judging them for being new. Leading that group changed her more than she expected. She had never thought of herself as a leader in any public way, being quiet and practical and reserved by nature. But leadership does not always arrive with a raised voice. Sometimes it arrives as consistency, sometimes as patience. Sometimes it is only the willingness to stay beside a person long enough for her to start believing in herself again. By 2018, she knew it was time to step away. The group had grown, and leading it had turned administrative, all routes and logistics and messages, until she had become less a cyclist than a coordinator. And she missed simply riding beside her husband on a quiet Saturday with nothing waiting at every stop. New leaders had already begun rising out of the group on their own. Riders she and Barron had mentored without quite realizing they were preparing them to take over. So she handed it off, and the thing kept growing after she was gone. That may be the part she is proudest of now. That it outlived her tenure. That nervous beginners are still finding their way onto those trails on a Saturday morning, because a small group of people once decided that beginners deserved a safe place to start. Chapter 12. Barron the Cruises. On the third afternoon at sea, she vanished for 20 minutes and came back holding a vanilla soft serve cone, wearing sunglasses, and the face of a woman who had located exactly what she came for. He looked up from the balcony and laughed, because by then he knew the pattern. Every cruise had one. By the second or third day aboard, Kim would locate the soft-serve machine near the pool deck, as though she were running a quiet intelligence operation. And once she had it fixed on her map, the whole rhythm of her vacation reorganized itself around that spot. Once a day at first, then twice. By day 5, she would casually disappear in the afternoon and reappear with another cone, and the deep satisfaction of a woman who had fully surrendered to being on vacation. A nutritionist would have staged an intervention by day 6. But vacation runs on different law, and honestly, watching her take that plane a joy that freely became one of his favorite things about every trip. After everything adulthood extracts from a person, jobs and bills and losses, and the slow accounting of age, the woman he loved could still be made completely happy by soft serve on a Wednesday at sea. And that meant more to him than he can quite explain. By the time he is writing this, they have taken 7 cruises together. The first was their honeymoon in 2011, with Bernard and Marjorie Dixon in a cabin a couple of doors down the hall. And the rest came one at a time after they realized, somewhere during that first trip, that this fit them in a way no other vacation ever had. He remembers the first real dinner of that honeymoon, the 4 of them at a table by the window, Bernard telling some long story about a wrong turn in a rental car that had them all laughing before the entrees came. Marjorie reaching over to squeeze Kim's hand and call her Mrs. Darby for what could not have been more than the 3rd or 4th time in the young life of that name. Kim tried it on. He watched her hear herself called that and not correct it, watched the small, pleased set of her mouth, and he thought, quietly, over a plate of food he would not have cooked at home, that he had spent decades at tables where he was the man passing through, the guest who would be gone by a certain city, and that he was, for the first time, at a table he belonged to. Nobody at that window was leaving anybody. That was new. He had to look out at the water for a minute before he trusted his own face. Most sailed on Royal Caribbean ships, most of them through the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is where a lot of hardworking black couples from the East Coast eventually land when they finally decide they have earned a few days away from the whole exhausting machine of American adulthood. The funny thing is that you would never have picked them out as cruise people. They were never dancing at the nightclub at 1 in the morning. They were not the casino couple. You would not find them zip-lining off the top deck or shouting through a poolside contest. The ships advertise non-stop excitement, parties, and nightlife and adventure, and almost none of that was what they came for. What they came for was quiet. What they came for was the absence of obligation. That is the thing he eventually understood about middle age. Rest stops being about stimulation and starts being about relief. And by your 50s, peace simply looks better than noise. So their cruises grew their own liturgy. The first afternoon always felt the same, the two of them boarding with too many bags, slightly overwhelmed by the crush of the terminal. Kim always wanted to unpack at once. He always wanted to stand on the balcony first and watch the port fall away behind them. They compromised the way married people always compromise, which is that she unpacked while he watched the shoreline shrink. There is something quietly emotional about a ship leaving harbor. For a few minutes, you can physically feel yourself coming loose from ordinary life. The phone stops mattering. The work email goes irrelevant. The land eases back slowly enough that your mind has time to understand what is happening. You are setting your whole life down for a little while. Dinner became part of the ritual too. Before each trip, Kim reserved the same small table for two, because she liked a little structure even at sea. And every evening, they dressed and walked the polished corridors and sat down, while waiters carried out food neither of them would ever have cooked at home. What he remembers most now is not the food. It is the conversation, and sometimes the sweet absence of it. That is one of the hidden luxuries of a long marriage. You stop feeling any pressure to fill a silence. Young couples measure love in constant talk. Older ones know that real closeness often looks like two people content to sit quietly together while music drifts across a dining room and somehow feel complete. After dinner, they went to the nightly shows, which were wonderful in exactly the way cruise entertainment is always wonderful. Singers and dancers, and elaborate costumes, and earnest tribute acts performed with total sincerity for an audience half dazzled and half sleepy from dinner. They loved them, not because they were Broadway, but because they were sincere. And there is something disarming about people trying that hard to delight strangers in the middle of the ocean. Then they would walk slowly back to the cabin through hallways gone hushed and low-lit, sometimes stopping at a railing to look out at nothing but dark water rolling away in every direction. The mornings were his favorite. There is a particular peace in waking at sea with absolutely nowhere you are required to be. No alarm, no commute, no decision more urgent than coffee before or after the balcony. That balcony was the real destination of every trip. They spent hours out there over the years, coffee at sunrise, long, slow talk in the afternoons about family and football and aging and her parents and his years in uniform, and whether they should book another one next year. By the second or third day, they always reached the same verdict. Yes, they should absolutely do this again. Because in the end, the cruises were never about the ships or the ports. They were the marriage lifted out of interruption and set gently down in the center of the ocean, the same humor and the same affection and the same easy quiet they had built at home, only now with water on every side. Part 4. The Forever Home. Chapter 13. Kim Daddy. A nurse she had never met held a phone up to her father's ear, and Kim said the last things into it. And that is how she got to say goodbye to the man who taught her how to do a corner right. The hardest year of her life was 2020, and there is not much to explain about why, because every American hearing this lived it, and has the year filed in the same drawer she keeps hers in. It was the year of the masks, and the empty shelves, and the number that arrived every morning with no way to make peace with it. It was the year. Her father, Dr. James Tucker, whose name in her mouth had been the word daddy for as long as she had owned a mouth, was in an assisted living facility outside Baltimore. He had been in the slow, careful decline a man in his 70s eventually enters, and she and her mother and her brother Jason had agreed together that the facility was the right place for him because it had nurses and doctors and the kind of round-the-clock care the three of them could not give a man while living their own working lives. In an ordinary year, that arrangement would have kept him comfortable to the end. Then 2020 arrived at the building. The dates the virus reached that place do not need to go on the page. The names of the staff do not either, nor the question of what might have been done differently, none of which she has any interest in litigating. Only this: the virus came, and the virus took her father, and it did the taking in a way that gave neither his wife, nor his son, nor his daughter the right to stand in the room with him. That right is the one every American daughter who lost a parent that year is still. On the quiet afternoons, trying to make her peace with never having had. She did not get to hold his hand. She did not get to sit at the edge of the bed. She did not get to be the daughter in the room on the last evening, the way daughters are in the books and the movies, and in the private expectations of any daughter raised in a faith-rooted Black family in Baltimore. She held a phone. A nurse held the other one to him, the way nurses across the whole country were holding phones in those weeks for the people the rules would not let inside. And she said into the phone the things she had been raised her whole life to know how to say. She said, "I love you, Daddy." She said, "You have been a good father." She said, "You have been a good husband." She said, "You have been a good man." She told him the cleaning business was a good business. She reminded him of the night a floor buffer had died mid-shift and left them both helpless, and how he had laughed until he had to sit down. She promised him that Mama would be looked after, and that Jason would hold the family together, and that his grandchildren would be fine, and that she herself would find her feet again in time. She did not say, "Barron is going to be all right." She did not say it because she did not need to. The man who had picked her up at Towson on graduation day, the man who had walked her up the aisle at 39, already knew. He had been the witness to the marriage she had made. He had been the voice on the other end of the phone on the Sunday afternoons when she called from Maryland to tell him the small things a daughter tells her father. He already knew the man was good. She did not have to spend one of the last sentences on it. He died. He died without the ceremony of his own family in the room, with a nurse and a phone, on a Tuesday afternoon in 2020, in an ordinary bed in a building outside Baltimore. They could not hold a funeral. They held a gathering on a screen. The family who would have filled the pews reduced to squares on a laptop, which was the private grief of nearly every American family that year. A family kept apart on the one day it most needed to stand together. She sat at the kitchen table on Sugarberry Street, and Barron sat beside her, and he held her hand, and he did not say very much. He has always been inside their marriage, the man who says the least on the most important days, and who, in saying so little, somehow becomes the most present person in the room. He held her hand through the whole of that screen-lit funeral. He held it through most of that week. And on every anniversary of the day since, at the kitchen table over morning coffee, he has held it again while they say a prayer with Daddy's name in it. That chapter cannot be left out, because the man she married in a small Baltimore church on the 9th of July, 2011, was the man her father had walked her toward. He was the only chest she could put her head against and cry for her father in the worst week of her life, and know that the arms around her were not going anywhere. He showed up. He kept showing up. Daddy had spent a lifetime teaching her what to look for in a man. All these years, Barron had been it. Chapter 14, Barron, Florida. They sat in 2 rocking chairs on a bare Florida patio, watching the light move on a stand of palms, and neither of them said a word, because after 10 years, they did not have to. The moving truck was still a couple of days out. The boxes were somewhere on the interstate. The house behind them was empty, 4 bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen with nothing in it yet but echo. And out past the screen was a pool the developer had dropped behind every house in the subdivision, and a row of palms he had planted to go with it. The 2 rocking chairs had come off the car first, by some unspoken agreement about how they were going to do this place. So they sat, and they looked at the palms, and they listened to Florida birds he had never gotten used to in all his years of Maryland. And they waited for their life to catch up to them on a truck. Here is why they had left Maryland. By the time 2020 finished doing what it did to every family in the federal suburbs of Washington, the inside of their house in Waldorf had become a different house than the one they had been building since 2012. Sugarberry was the house Daddy had been alive for. It was the house where Kim's mother had stood in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons, that weekly anchor a daughter cannot replace once her father is gone. Maryland had become the place where Daddy had been, and it was no longer the place they wanted to be. There was an absence in it that the two of them, standing in that kitchen on a Sunday, could not talk over. So they picked Florida, which was not the obvious pick for two careful black federal employees in their 50s, but which had come up on their weekend conversations for years as the place they might someday land. The year 2020 turned someday into now, and they picked Leesburg, which is not Orlando, and not Tampa, and not Miami, but the kind of Florida town careful couples in their 50s choose because it has the plain good things: a lake, a downtown, houses two people could actually afford after a decade of paying down a Maryland mortgage. The house they bought there was 2,800 square feet, the third they had ever owned together, after the townhouse on Spearfish Place and the 4,200 square foot house on Sugarberry. It was smaller than the one and larger than the other, and that shift in scale was itself the thing they had decided they wanted. They moved in February of 2022, and it was the first move of his entire life that he was not driving the truck for. He was 55. He had been, for decades, the man who drove every truck of every move he had ever made. And this time, he hired a company, which was a quiet way of admitting that the man who had always been so good at leaving no longer had the back for lifting a couch. I could not lift a couch anymore and would not pretend otherwise, he says, laughing, the leaving finally done by professionals. They put the cars on the auto train and rode it down and got off in Sanford and drove out to Leesburg, stopping once at a gas station for bad coffee, to stand in the empty house they now owned. They did not talk that first afternoon, out on the patio in the two chairs. They did not need to. The state of Maryland that morning had become a state he had left in a way he had never left any of the others. He had left it on purpose. He had left it for the right reasons. And he had left it sitting beside the one person in the whole long list of places and people he had ever walked away from, who was never going to let him walk away again. He was on a patio in Leesburg Florida with his wife. And inside his 55-year-old life, he was home. He had spent his whole life leaving, and he had never once been home before. In the 4 years since, he has been here. Chapter 15. Kim, the Headache Years. She learned to read the mornings by the set of his shoulders. And on the bad mornings, she learned to hand him the coffee without a word, and let the day get smaller around him. The years between 2022 and 2025 asked her to be a different kind of wife than she had been the decade before, because somewhere around 2021, in their last Maryland year, her husband's body had begun quietly breaking. Not the dramatic breaking the medical shows are built on. The slow kind, the kind that most mornings did not look like anything at all. A headache, a back more sore than the month before, a blood pressure number his doctor had stopped being satisfied with. The doctors gave the breaking its names: hypertension, spinal stenosis, chronic migraines. The whole list a doctor reads to a 50-something black man in this country, along with the instructions for keeping the body he has going a while longer. There was one morning she keeps, because it taught her the shape of the new job. He had come into the kitchen slow, one hand flat against the doorframe, and lowered himself into the chair the way a much older man lowers himself, and she had seen the migraine sitting behind his eyes before he said a word about it. She did not ask him 20 questions. She had learned that 20 questions only make him build the wall higher. She drew the blinds against the Florida glare, set the coffee down within reach, put 2 of the pills beside it and a glass of water, and pulled out the chair across from him and simply sat, so he would not have to be sick alone. He said, "I'm all right, Kitten," in the voice that means he is not. And she said, "I know," in the voice that means she does not believe him and is not going anywhere. That was the whole of it. That was the marriage she had signed up for without knowing it. The one where love stops looking like a bicycle built for 2 and starts looking like a drawn blind and a glass of water and a woman who will not leave the room. Even then, the old routine held. "Did you eat?" she would ask, folding the laundry on the kitchen table. "I'll eat," he would say. "You said that yesterday," she would answer. And even sick, he ended up laughing, because being nagged about oatmeal is proof somebody keeps track. He was never on the dramatic list. No stroke, no heart attack, no ambulance, no emergency that would have made the local news. He was on the longer, quieter list, the one that does not look like a list, the one made of headaches and morning back spasms and second opinions and small daily subtractions from what a husband can and cannot do on a Tuesday in Central Florida. She had been the decade before, the wife who rode bicycles beside him on Saturdays. The wife on the tandem along the canal, at the front of a trailblazer's loop, on a balcony at sea, watching her husband happily work his way through a third day of buffet. She had been a wife in motion. Now she had to become the wife who learned, week by week, what kind of motion his body could still afford. In 2024, they started riding recumbent trikes. Most people she meets do not know what one is, so a recumbent trike is a 3-wheeled cycle you ride reclined, legs stretched out in front, hands on bars up at chest level. It is the machine a man with a failing back can ride without finishing off the back. The machine, a 58-year-old Navy veteran with migraines and stenosis and high blood pressure, can take out for 90 minutes on a Tuesday among a whole flock of similarly reclined Floridians who have worked out the same clever detour around their own bodies. The club is called CRABS. It gathers in a parking lot somewhere in Central Florida on a Tuesday morning and rolls out a slow 10 or 15 miles. It is not GII. It is not the W and OD on a Saturday with 30 new riders behind you. It is the retirement-aged cousin of GII, 3 wheels instead of 2, headrests instead of racing helmets, a group of people whose bodies rode hard in a previous life, and who now, gladly, ride what they can. She does not ride with CRABS. Her own body at 54 has not yet had to make the accommodations his has. She is still on 2 wheels, still on the paved trails of Central Florida, and on most Saturday mornings she rides alone, and she is at peace with that. Her marriage is no longer 2 people on the same bicycle. It is 2 people on 2 different machines, out of the same house, back to the same kitchen table, where they sit with a cup of coffee and tell each other what the morning was. Her morning was a slow loop on a paved trail. His was a slow loop on a trike among new friends. The mornings, most Saturdays, are different now. The table at the close of them is the same. That is what a marriage in your 50s turns out to be. Not 2 riders on 1 bike, but 2 people who have decided that the same table at the end of the ride is the same marriage. The ride is the ride. The table is the thing. They have it. They sit at it. They pour the coffee. They tell each other how it went. Chapter 16. Barron, the letter from the government. The letter said resign or be fired, and he read it standing up in a Leesburg kitchen. A 58-year-old man who had given the federal government his whole working life. The year 2025 turned their Florida life over with a single piece of paper. He had been the federal employee in the marriage since 2008, the one who put on a suit, or in the later years, an honest approximation of one, and went to the job that paid paid the bills their careful household paid. By 2025, that job was at the Internal Revenue Service. He had come to it the way a man does who lost a Department of Labor probation in 2008. And then, over the years that followed, found his way back into the system anyway. He had started at the IRS in June of 2020, after the GAO contract ran out. And by the time the letter came, he had been there almost 5 years. The IRS has never been a beloved agency, and this chapter will not argue its popularity. It was simply, for those 5 years, his employer. The man whose name was on the inauguration in January of 2025 was not a name he had ever picked out of any lineup he was offered. He is not named here, and he is not the point. The point is what the administration did in February and March of that year to the job. It came the way these things come for the IRS. It sent the letter. The letter said resign or be fired. He carried the letter out to the kitchen where Kim was working and set it on the counter between them. And he watched her read it the way she reads everything, slowly, twice, her face giving nothing away, until she was sure of the whole shape of it. She did not gasp. She did not fill the air. She took her first hour, the way she has always taken her first hour, and he let her have it, because after all this time, he knew that the quiet was not distance. It was the sound of her deciding to stand with him before she said a single word. When the hour was up, she folded the letter along its own crease and looked at him and said, "We knew this was possible." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "What did you do?" We, 15 years on, and the pronoun still landed in him the same way it had landed on a phone call all those years before, like a hand slipped into his in the dark. I will tell you what I had wrong for most of my life. I was wrong that a man handles bad news best alone. I could not have carried that letter by myself. We ended the night laughing, of all things, at a government that asks a man to fire himself. In 58 years of working for the federal government, in the Navy and the Reserve and the Department of Labor, and a long string of contracts in between, he had never once been told, in writing, by the government he worked for, to choose between resigning and being fired. The government he had always known had been the kind that, on most days, did the unglamorous work of keeping its own people on the payrolls it had signed them up for. In February and March of 2025, it was no longer that kind of government. He resigned. He resigned because, in the plain arithmetic of a 58-year-old black man's resume, the difference between resigning and being fired was the difference between a careful retirement and a firing on the public record. He had spent the decade accruing the retirement a federal employee accrues, counting every such man, on reaching the age and simply stopping. The administration made him stop a few years early. The letter came in those first weeks. The deadline it set was the end of the fiscal year, and he stopped on the last day of October 2025. What stopping did to their Leesburg life was mathematical and immediate. The household that had run on 2 federal salaries now ran on 1 salary and 1 pension. His the pension, Kim's the salary. She was going to keep working because OSHA and the Department of Labor it sits inside were not the agency the administration had come for that spring. He was retired, and on 1 salary and 1 pension, they could not keep the Leesburg house. They sold it. They sold it for what the Central Florida market of late 2025 would give them, took the number, and moved into a rental in the corridor between Leesburg and Orlando while they worked out what came next. They worked it out because by then they had been working out the next thing together for 15 years. They had worked it out on Spearfish Place. They had worked it out 8 weeks before the wedding. They had worked it out in 100 small ways in 100 kitchens. And they worked it out again at the table in the rental in the closing months of a year that had not gone the way any of their planning had drawn it up. "What are we going to do?" Kim said. "We're going to be okay." What does okay look like? Smaller. Can we do smaller? We've always done smaller. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. So that is what they did. They did smaller. They chose a 55 and up community in a Florida town they had come to like on their years of sightseeing. A gated place built for people exactly like them who had decided the next chapter was a smaller one. The town was St. Cloud. They bought a smaller house, still going up in the spring of 2026, while he sits in a rental and writes this book, a house that will have, when it is finished, a view of a piece of water. The view is the part he has been saving up for. The view is the next chapter. Chapter 17, Kim St. Cloud. A great blue heron was standing in the pond behind the model home, as if it held the deed. And Kim stood at the edge of the unbuilt patio and decided, then and there, that she could live next to a bird like that. The house in St. Cloud is the house this whole book has quietly been about. It sits in a 55 and up community, which most people outside Central Florida have never had to picture. So here it is. A gated subdivision where the rules require that at least one person in every household be 55 or older on the day the papers are signed. A place full of neighbors near or in retirement. Quieter on a weekday morning than an ordinary street, and quieter still on a weekend. Exactly the kind of subdivision 2 careful people in their 50s choose after a decade in larger, louder houses. Having decided that the next stretch of the life should be calm on purpose, they picked a house, and it came with a list of things she had spent a lifetime picturing. A kitchen of the kind she had dreamed about since she was a girl running a mop across an office floor after hours. A living room with a fireplace she is honest enough to admit she will never once light, because this is Central Florida, and the fireplace is going to be, on most evenings, a handsome decoration. 3 bedrooms, 2 of them smaller and the third the master. And off the master, a walk-in closet that answered almost exactly. A closet she had been building in her head her whole life. She had walked the model of it on a bright afternoon, with the sales agent trailing a few respectful steps behind. And she had done what she always does in a house she is considering, which is go quiet and let her hands do the deciding. She ran a palm along the kitchen counter. She opened a cabinet and closed it and listened to the soft way it caught. She stood in the doorway of the master closet longer than the agent expected, saying nothing, because she was not looking at a closet. She was looking at a whole life's worth of Sunday clothes and cruise dresses, and one good coat finally having a room of their own. I am not a woman who needs much, she thought, but Lord, I have wanted a closet like this my whole life. Barron stayed by the sliding door with his hands in his pockets, watching the water, letting her have it, because he understood that this walkthrough was hers in a way the others had not been. This was the one she had earned, the small, far end of everything, and out back a patio, and past the patio the pond, and standing in the pond most mornings the heron, in the exact posture of a bird that has looked over a piece of water and concluded that the water is his. The heron kept holding its post like a landlord doing his rounds. He is the neighbor she expects to wave at most often across the new backyard, and she finds she is glad about him. Glad in a way that surprises her. At her own private accounting of what she wants from a neighbor in the last chapter of a life. There was a small, familiar thing that happened in the parking lot of the model home. The thing that has trailed her through every state and grocery line and lobby of the last 20 years. A woman from the community walked over, stopped in the middle of her own afternoon, looked up at Kim, and said the sentence, "Has anybody ever told you that you look like Michelle Obama?" "Every Tuesday for the last 20 years, Kim said. The woman laughed. "Well, you do." "Thank you," Kim said, and walked back to the car. And the neighbor went on with her afternoon, and Kim went on with hers. She was fine with it in an elevator on the 4th floor years ago. She was fine with it in a buffet line on the 3rd day of a cruise in 2018. She is fine with it now in a parking lot in St. Cloud. 2 women at the end of a workday being exactly who they are. The house has a guest room, and she has already been choosing beds for it, because the guest room is where her private hopes about her nieces and nephews live. They are in Maryland. They are not going to come down most weekends. She knows that. In the honest part of her, that keeps the real ledger. She is choosing the beds anyway, hoping anyway, the way an ant does. Here is what the smaller house stands for after 15 years. It is the shape of the agreement she and her husband made a long time ago about how they intend to spend the rest of the life, which is together. And in this house, and most mornings on the back patio with a cup of coffee and the heron on the pond, and the Florida sun coming up the way it comes up over the kind of quiet community she has decided at 54 she wants to live the rest of her life inside. She is ready for the house. She has been ready in some way for 15 years. And the house, in some way, has been getting itself ready for her. In a few weeks, they will carry the keys through the front door and set down the boxes and stand in the empty living room and take the breath every home buyer takes on the first afternoon in the place they mean to stay. And they will know in the private center of themselves that they are finally where they have been walking the whole time. Chapter 18. Barron, Pookie, and Kitten. "You look like a kitten," he said, one evening on a couch in Perry Hall, and a marriage's whole private language started right there. She was curled into the corner of the couch with a mug of tea in both hands, watching a woman on television deliver justice to strangers, soft-spoken and folded up small at the end of a working day. And the word simply arrived in him, and he said it out loud. She laughed, and within a few days, the man on the couch beside her had started calling her Kitten. And in all the years since, he has never once stopped. And inside the house in St. Cloud, he is going to go right on calling her Kitten on most evenings for the rest of their life. She got her own back fast. Within that same run of evenings, in that same little apartment, she looked at the soft-spoken man with the suit and the tie and the cufflinks and the old navy haircut, and decided in her own naming heart that he was a Pookie. "What does Pookie even mean?" he said. "It means I get to call you Pookie." That's not an explanation. It doesn't have to be. He never asked again. He has been Pookie ever since. And here is what 15 years of being called Pookie has done to a man who spent the first 4 decades of his life being called at most. The things a person is called when he keeps leaving every town and every job and every relationship, none of which ever stuck. Pookie stuck. It made him, over 15 years, into a man who stands at a kitchen island most mornings and watches a fully dressed woman gather her laptop for a 17-foot commute to an office at the far end of the hallway, and feels, in the private center of himself, the strange certainty that the Pookie he became is the man he was supposed to have been the whole time. He had not, before her, been called anything in particular that lasted. He is Pookie now. He has become it. There is one more private thing, and it will be set down on the page exactly once. Kitten burps. In the sealed rooms of a marriage, the soft-spoken woman burps, the way any woman in her 50s burps on a Tuesday evening after her third soft serve of the afternoon. The way any woman who has decided that the man beside her is the one man on earth in front of whom she is comfortable enough to be a whole, ordinary body. And he, being a man who has made a small career out of naming the private machinery a marriage actually runs on, named it. He calls it the Slurpy Burpee. She laughs every single time. That is the kind of joke 15 years builds, and it is worth as much, in the currency of an actual marriage, as any vow. The chapter closes on the plain inventory of what their life together runs on now. Mornings in the kitchen with the coffee cup and a verse read off a phone, the dishwasher humming, and a coffee mug drying by the sink, the backyard going gold with morning. Evenings on the couch with a court show and the Slurpy Burpee and a kiss dropped on the top of a head. Sundays in the Florida fall with the Baltimore Ravens on the television, and a jersey on the soft-spoken woman on the couch and her Pookie in the chair beside her, watching the Ravens lose to whoever they are losing to this week, and staying anyway. Every Sunday, there they are. He loves her. She loves him back. Of every sentence, the book has spent 18 chapters trying to say, that is the one that says it. Epilogue. A Sunday morning. The kitchen of the house in St. Cloud, in the late summer of 2026. And this last part goes down in the third person, because the third person is the only honest vantage on a room this quiet. The man is at the kitchen table in a t-shirt and gym shorts. He is 59. His hair has, at his own hairline, mostly surrendered. He is reading a verse off his phone, and there is coffee at his elbow. And behind him, a sliding door looks out on a small pond where a heron is running its usual patrol. The woman is in the living room, in a Baltimore Ravens jersey with the name of some linebacker across the shoulders, a name the man at the table could not produce this morning if his life depended on it. The woman could. She can recite the whole defensive lineage of the last 20 Ravens seasons, the way other people recite scripture. The television is tuned to the Sunday morning pregame, all noise and prediction, and she is waiting on the kickoff with the patience of a lifelong fan. The woman in the living room burps. The man at the table laughs. Slurpy burpy, he says. The woman laughs. The man gets up. He crosses the kitchen and comes around behind the couch where the soft-spoken woman in the jersey is waiting for the game, and he kisses the top of her head. She looks up. Pookie, she says. Kitten, he says. The game's starting. All right. He sits down next to her. Somewhere in a stadium, 1,000 miles north, the Ravens kick the football down the field, and 2 adults on a couch in a 55-and-up community in Central Florida take hold of each other's hands, the way they have on 10,000 ordinary mornings, the way they intend to for whatever mornings are left. The Ravens, most Sundays, are going to lose. The 2 people on the couch, most Sundays, are going to be there anyway. That is the marriage. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. Author's note: I am Barron Darby, and this is the true story of my life with my wife. Her name is Kimberly Tucker Darby. We were married in the city of Baltimore on the 9th of July, 2011. And by the date at the bottom of this note, we have been married almost 15 years. Everything on the outside of this book is real. This novel is inspired by and faithful to a life we actually lived, not a life publicly performed. The cities are real. The dates are real. The snack room on the 4th floor of the Department of Labor is real. And so is the will I once handed her to edit, and the door she once opened, and the heron on the pond behind the house in St. Cloud. Kim is real, and 6 feet tall, and the easiest laugh on the call. But a life is not a transcript, and this book is a novel, and I owe you the honesty of saying so plainly. The dialogue in these pages has been dramatized. The interior thoughts, hers as much as mine, have been imagined and recreated from memory, reached for across 15 and 20 and 40 years. Nobody was writing down what we said in a bike shop parking lot or on a balcony at sea. And so I have written it down the way it lives in me now, faithful to the feeling, if not to the syllable. Where memory was quiet, I kept the writing quiet. Where I could not honestly know another person's exact words, I wrote what I believe was in the room. Some names I have carried into the book on purpose. I lost a brother, Victor, and a mother, Claudinia, and a father, Alvin, and they belong in any honest account of me. So I named them and did not linger, the way a man mentions his dead and moves on. I have lost 2 sons, Aaron Darby and Marcus Darby, and I have carried them through every chapter, whether their names appeared in it or not. Kim lost her father, Dr. James Tucker, in the early days of the pandemic that took somebody from nearly every family in this country. And I have tried to give that chapter the reverence the man is owed. Other names I have kept off the page on purpose, because some lives belong to the people living them and are not mine to spend in a book about a marriage. That marriage is the whole subject. 2 quiet people who found each other late over bad cafeteria coffee and decided to stay. I have written a lot of pages in my life, and I have learned that the truest ones are almost never the loud ones. The truest ones are a door opened in silver spring, a hand held through a funeral held on a screen, a woman who takes her first quiet hour and then says we. If any of this landed on you, it is because your own life is full of the same small, unspectacular miracles, and you already know it. We are, on the day I finish writing this, still showing up. We will be showing up tomorrow. Kim, this one is for you. I love you, Kitten. Barron Darby. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. This has been a Books by Barron audiobook in the Love Stories series, written, produced, and directed by Barron Darby, and narrated by Grace Winslow. Thank you for listening.